All right, what's going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to be talking about Cowboy Bebop. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at all 26 episodes and rank them from worst to best, in my opinion. And the reason we're doing this right now is because if some of you haven't heard, November 19th, the live-action Cowboy Bebop is coming to Netflix. Now, I know there's a lot of animosity and a lot of unease about Netflix animes that are being adapted, because a lot of them in the past have been pretty awful. Look no further than Death Note. The original anime series was fantastic. The Netflix adaptation, not so much. Got a little bit too edgy, if you know what I mean. But I'm hopeful about the adaptation this time around for Cowboy Bebop. The opening sequence looks absolutely fantastic, and I think the preview episode was pretty good as well. The animation is top-notch. As for the actors, we're going to have to see how it plays out. We'll have to see how they adapt the specific episodes, and we'll have to see what Edward looks like, because as many of you know, she didn't show up in the previews. So everyone's kind of worried about, well, where's Edward? Is she going to show up? Are they going to change her character in some way that kind of alters the series that isn't so good? We just don't know at this point in time. However, let's get into the tier list here. And as a preface, I just want to let you guys know, it's going to go from S plus to D. Now, D does not mean that's a bad episode. Let's be clear about this. This is Cowboy Bebop after all. All the episodes are pretty much good for the most part. However, D just means it's a lower tier for the episode itself. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It may have parts that are not as good as others, but not bad. All right, so the first episode we got here is Cowboy Funk. Now, this was the episode in which a serial bomber was going around and blowing up specific buildings. Spike tried to stop the bomber, but every time that happened, this cowboy would come in, spout some relatively cliched lines, as you know, typical of a 60s or 70s Western, and would stop Spike from catching the bomber and getting his bounty. Now, this man absolutely pissed off Spike because this was your typical Western cowboy, and Spike, being a space cowboy, even though he is relatively different from this character, he's basically the complete opposite, because where the cowboy is upholding a certain code, a certain moral code, Spike is more so go with the flow, just whatever happens, happens, and I'll accept it. Kind of following the Bruce Lee archetype, if you will. He's water. He's just going to assume any form that he needs to. He's not going to be in a fixed state, whereas the cowboy is doing things by the book. And it's supposed to be funny because Spike doesn't really realize that in a lot of ways they are sort of similar to one another. And if you watch the last episode of the series, Mismash Blues, he kind of talks about the fact that, oh, if I ate hamburgers all the time and there was another version of myself, would I become a different version of myself? Would I be a more angrier version? Would I be nicer? Would I be more altruistic? Would I be more philosophical? And this was kind of interesting because maybe in an alternate universe, maybe 100 years prior to the events of Cowboy Bebop, maybe he would have been this cowboy. Maybe he would have been searching for bounties and just been a by-the-book sort of character. So it's kind of funny in that regard because they're sort of mirror images of one another, and yet Spike doesn't really recognize that. Now, it was a little more lackadaisical. It was more focused on the comedic elements, so it wasn't as powerful or as impactful as some of the other episodes in the series, but it was still funny in its own way. Now, the next episode we have here is Toys in the Attic. That's when there's a mysterious something lurking around the Bebop and infecting all the members and giving them these purple welts on their bodies. And Spike's got to figure out what it is. And eventually he does. It was the lobster that he left in the refrigerator from like a year ago. And again, this is another comedic episode. Very funny. It just doesn't hit the highs of some of the other episodes in the series. And you'll kind of notice that the comedic-centric episodes are a little bit lower on my list. It doesn't mean that they're bad in any regard. It's just, I don't think they're as powerful or as impactful. And then last one we have here is Heavy Metal Queen. Now, Heavy Metal Queen was the one that featured the quote-unquote trucker, VT, as she helped them get out of a dangerous asteroid mine. And it just wasn't the greatest episode in the world. And in fact, it's probably my least favorite episode in the series. It just didn't really have any memorable moments. I mean, the one scene that I always remember is when Spike is inside the bar and he's getting the egg because he's got a hangover, and then someone knocks the egg out of his hand and he's like, I needed that egg, and then he starts kicking everyone's ass. It was an alright episode. Alright, so now we're on the C tier here, and the first one we got up on the docket is Boogie Woogie Feng Shui. Now, this episode features Jet, and he gets called to a grave by his old friend Pow, and is surprised to find out that he's dead. He eventually meets his daughter, and then they kind of go on this wild goose chase in which they try to figure out some clues to figure out where he is. And it's a nice little emotional episode. Not as notable as some of the other ones, but it has its moments here and there. Okay, so next one we got is Gateway Shuffle. Now, Spike and Jet were inside of a restaurant and they were ordering some food, and then this extreme animal rights activist group called the Space Warriors, and, they're protesting the fact that, everyone's eating animals and they don't like it. And this is a very interesting episode. It did get a bit hackneyed at the end, with the vial in which they all turn into monkeys, a little bit of just desserts, if you will, because they wanted to turn the people of a planet into monkeys as a sort of punishment for their abuse of various animals, and then they themselves were turned into monkeys, which is kind of ironic because if you think about it, like modern day people right now in the 21st century, some of these PETA activists, and I definitely don't support like animal farms or like the abuse of animals. I'm not a vegan though, and look, we eat meat, we need protein, we need those complex amino acids and such. But anyway, my point is that some of these people take it so far to the point where they actually value an animal's life over a human's life. And they almost consider like humans' existence parasitic, kind of a callback to like the Matrix or something. But you know what I mean by that, where some of these animal activist groups basically are like to the point where it's like they feel like their presence on the earth is a hindrance, and it would just be better off if most humans were just gone so that animals could roam free and everything would go back to normal again. And it's like, well, at the same time, we are byproducts of the earth, we are animals ourselves. So this kind of episode was sort of making the point that, hey, if you feel like animals should be placed above humans, then you yourself can become an animal and live in nature, and there you go. So I feel like that was a nice little bit of ironic humor, ironic satire there by Shinichiro Watanabe. So I really appreciated that. And then the next one we got here is Wild Horses. Now this is the episode where Spike gets his ship fixed, the Swordfish, and he visits his old friend Doohan. Nice little episode. Definitely always interesting when we get to see where like certain elements of the show come from, to see past events. And so yeah, I mean it was just a nice solid episode. Nothing great, nothing terrible, just solid episode. Okay, so next one we have here is Bohemian Rhapsody. Now this one's actually kind of surprising because this episode features a guy who's hijacking astral gates, and they get a chess piece in which they're able to figure out where he's located, and Ed plays a game of chess with him. Now, I say this is surprising that it's so low because I'm actually an avid chess player myself. On Lee Chess, I have a chess rating of around 2200. And I've racked up quite a few chess trophies in my day. So you would think maybe I would like this episode a little bit more, but the episode doesn't really feature the chess game itself. Like, you see Ed playing with Chess Master Hex, but it's not like they go over any strategies or tactics or any openings or like the psychology of the chess game. It's more so just Ed playing it, and you're just supposed to made to believe that, you know, she's this brilliant person because she's keeping up with a guy who was like considered a genius by everyone else and was never beaten in like 40-50 years. So they kind of use it more as a ploy, if you will. They don't really dive into the game, and I can understand why, because most people don't play chess on the level that, say, I or an international master or a grandmaster would play at. So to understand all those little intricacies and thought processes about what's going on in the game and the different tactics and strategies and in-between moves, it would be beyond most people. And not to say that you're not intelligent if you don't understand it, because it's one of those things where it's very esoteric. Like, if someone showed me a game like Dark Souls, which is a very deep and meaningful game, I would have no idea what's going on because I've never played that game. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you played it, you understand it. If you don't, then it's just like, well, it can kind of go over your head and you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. It was kind of the same thing with that chess series on Netflix that just came out. My wife was talking about it. It was some redhead girl or something. And she's like, oh, you should watch this. You love chess. And I'm like, just because it features chess doesn't really mean it's about chess. It's one of those series, from what I gathered from my limited time kind of just peeking up at it, was that it was more about her story rather than about the chess games themselves. So it's like, not really interested in that. So it was an interesting episode nonetheless, though. Okay, so next one we got up here is Stray Dog Strut. Now, this was the second episode of the series, and this was the episode in which Ein came in. And this episode featured capturing this dog, this data dog that basically had human level intelligence. Of course, Spike doesn't know that at the time, and he's chasing this guy named Hakim, and it's just a relatively fun episode. You know, it kind of has the vibe of like a 70s or 80s car chase in there, and it's just a fun little episode through and through. Okay, so now we're on the B tier here, and this one, we're going to start off with Mushroom Samba. Now, this is a very hilarious episode, probably one of the funniest in the series. You know, the Bebop, they're running out of food on the ship, and Ed goes down to this planet and eventually brings back some mushrooms. And, you know, she leaves them out on a plate, and then the various members of the ship, Faye, Jed, and Spike, have a taste of the mushroom because they're just starving, and they all go through hallucinogenic drug trips, and it's just absolutely great. You know, you got Faye swimming through an ocean, but she's in the bathroom. Spike keeps walking up these infinite set of stairs and talks to a frog. It's kind of reminiscent of a later episode of Samurai Champloo where Mugen, you know, he has, you know, they start burning the weed fields and he gets high off of the cannabis and he's just becoming all loopy. And it's almost a precursor of Samurai Champloo in that regard. So very cool, very fun episode. Next one is Honky Tonk Woman, and this is the episode where we get introduced to Faye. And this one's really cool because I love the casino, love seeing like this little like space casino orbiting a planet. Just a very cool concept there. Fun little episode. You got a nice little dynamic between Faye and Spike and their eventual burgeoning friendship, if you will call it that. Not really, but kind of. So yeah, just a nice little fun episode. You got some interesting fights, and of course, you know, Faye comes into the fold as well, and she's just a fantastic character through and through. Okay, so next one we got up here is Jammin' with Edward. Now, this was episode 9 in which Edward was introduced, and this one was kind of cool because you saw the power of computer hacking and how that could affect the future world. Like the fact that these satellites were just on their own carving images into the earth. It was almost sort of horrifying in a way because it's like, wow, what if we have a Terminator-like scenario where like machines become sentient in a way, in their own way, and they don't exactly know what they're doing. They're just doing it because of a program. And this was relatively innocuous. Like, it wasn't really hurting anyone, but what if it was hurting someone? What if, you know, you go out there and you're trying to destroy the satellites because, you know, they're going to do something more nefarious, and then they start to protect themselves out of necessity. So very interesting stuff there. It's also interesting to see how the Earth has sort of degraded over time and how it really doesn't even play a pivotal role in the part of the solar system anymore. Like Mars and Venus are more important, whereas Earth is kind of just this desolate wasteland. So very cool concept. Next one we got here is Speak Like a Child. Now, I think a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me here because this episode, in terms of like the emotional impact, was very heavy. You got to see a lot of phase past here and a little bit of insight into how she wasn't always this cynical, nihilistic woman, how she used to have hopes and dreams just like every teenage girl and teenage boy has. And it was kind of interesting to see how she was watching that little videotape and she was just struck by it, and it was impacting her in a very visceral way. So, you know, I could have put it higher on the list here, but when you see some of the other episodes and my rationale, I think this is probably the appropriate tier. Okay, so next one we got here is Black Dog Serenade. Now, another emotional episode, another revealing episode, but this time it's revealing in terms of Jet's history and how he was set up by his partner. And yeah, just a nice little insight into Jet's past, and just a nice world-building episode all the way through. And then we got the first episode in the series, Asteroid Blues, and this one featured that couple that was stealing the drug supply of Bloody Eye, and yeah, just a great episode to kick off the series. You got a nice little chase with Spike's swordfish, and it's very emotional and impactful, and it just kicks things off very well. You know, it's like you get almost everything in this episode. It's exhilarating, it's exciting, it's emotional, it's fast-paced, but it's slow at the same time, and it's got some love elements in there as well, and you got some nihilistic elements, like, why are we doing this? You know, we're stopping these people who also have their own hopes and dreams as well, and it's like, it's kind of brings up a lot of the philosophy of the whole series. Like, these guys make their living through catching other criminals, but they in and of themselves are fairly criminal in their own regard because, you know, they're using unusual tactics. You know, they're using guns, and they're kicking their butts, and they're beating people up, and they have mired pasts themselves where they did criminal things. So it's kind of like criminals catching criminals, and it's like, well, what's the point of it all, really? What separates the bounty hunters from the criminals themselves? It's a very thin line if you really think about it. So, great episode. Okay, so next one we got up is Waltz for Venus. Probably another surprising one for most people. I would imagine most people probably got this in the A or the S tier. Now, this one featured Rocco, and he was like a gang member that was stealing this plant so that he could recover his sister's eyesight. And very emotional episode. You get to understand a little bit more about Spike as well, and his philosophy, how he fights like water, and how he sort of goes with the flow, and he keeps himself loose and sort of ready to accept any sort of situation as it comes to him. So very nice emotional episode in that regard. And then we got My Funny Valentine. Now this is kind of interesting because if you ever read JoJo Part 7 Steel Ball Run, the main antagonist is Funny Valentine. So I wonder if they named that character after this episode in Cowboy Bebop, or maybe it came from something else. But this one, we learned a little bit more about Faye's past and how she was placed under so much debt in her life because of the cryogenic freezing that she went under and the surgery that happened after the fact. So a nice little episode and insight into Faye's past and understanding why she's the cynical person that she is because of how she got betrayed. So very good. Okay, so now we're on the A tier. So everything on the A tier and higher is just a cut above. It combines so many different great elements. You know, the stories, the characters, the music, the animation are just really top tier from here on out. And we're going to start off with Real Folk Blues Part 1. And, you know, the music selection in this episode and in Real Folks Blues Part 2 are just so well done. And then we find out more about Spike's past and Julia. And just a really nicely done episode. Hard Luck Woman is up next. We get to learn more about Edward's past and her father. And that ending part with the song that they play is just so emotional and just tugs at your heartstrings in such a way that it's like, how can you not shed a tear? It's like, Edward was such a silly character and so eccentric and just her own person, and then yet the way she left it was like, oh my God, like, I feel that, you know? It's like, I didn't feel like I could feel that for such a character, but it's the power of Bebop in the way that they can make you laugh in one moment, cry in the next, exhilarating in the next scene, philosophizing, and it's always so subtle in the way they do things. So a nice episode there. All right, so next one we got up is Ganymede Elegy. This one confronts Jet's past and his past lover, and some very nice symbolic elements in this episode. I love the stopped watch and how Jet's emotional growth has sort of stalled out. He hasn't moved forward from his past, and how he's been stuck in time in a way, and it's kind of a nice breakthrough moment for him to sort of let go of his past and continue his existence on the Bebop and sort of move forward and get away from everything. So a very nice episode. Okay, so next one we got here is Brain Scratch, and I considered putting this on the S tier. It has sort of a nice little philosophical moment at the end and sort of a warning about the proliferating technology in our society. And it was sort of interesting in a way because they sort of tied it into religion as well, and how even though we're sort of getting away from organized religion, how in a lot of ways we still have those feelings within us. You know, Nietzsche talked about this in a lot of his books where, you know, God is dead. Okay, so yeah, God is dead. Most people are sort of getting away from organized religion. However, we still have those thoughts within us that we want to believe in something, because if we don't believe in anything, we fall into nihilism and into despair. So we have to believe in something. And you sort of see this a lot with like different cultures that people are falling into in the 21st century. You know, a lot of people are getting into the political climate. They're falling into the game of left versus right, or they're falling into woke culture that, you know, everything is the fault of the 1% in the corporations, and we need to rebel against that. Even though there are a lot of faults within the system itself, you know, that's kind of how they're portraying themselves, that, you know, we're the disenfranchised and we need to rise up and we need to take them down. And really, it's not so much about rising up and taking them down. It's just a way for them to vent about the world and kind of make themselves feel better about themselves, sort of paint the evil corporations as evil, as I just said it, and sort of portray them as these, you know, malignant parts of society that are just dragging everyone down. Well, if you think about Christianity and a lot of religions, a lot of organized religions, it started off with disenfranchised people who didn't have a lot of power, in terms of like the Roman Empire, so they painted off the Roman rulers as evil. And this was especially done with Nero Caesar in terms of like the book of Revelations, because he persecuted the Christians after there was a fire in Rome. And he blamed them because guess what? They didn't have any power and no one really liked them to begin with. So it's like, well, I'll just scapegoat them. It's kind of, in a lot of ways, the only way that they could exert their will to power, if you will, was to say, well, he's the devil. He's propagating a lot of the devilish energies into the world. And this is kind of how like socialist and like woke culture is doing this as well, where they have to paint other people as the villains. But if the shoe was on the other foot, if they had the power, if they had the will, they might be doing something just as bad or possibly even worse. So it's always this dynamic in the world. I think Jordan Peterson talked about this as well, where it's like you're either the aggressor or you're the one being oppressed. Like you either fit into one of those two camps, and that sort of shapes your worldview from there on. And this guy in this episode, because he lost his ability to move around and talk and walk because he had that accident where he was stuck in the hospital, sort of fashioned himself to be a new god. And he took advantage of this situation and tried to get everyone to release themselves from their bodies because he didn't have a body. He didn't have that will to power. He didn't have something, so then he wanted to take it away. And that's sort of what I was trying to allude to, was that, Christianity didn't have power early on, especially in the Roman Empire, so they tried to paint everyone who did have power as evil and wicked forces of the devil. Same thing with woke culture. They don't have any power, so they go on a Twitter rant and say, well, these people are bad, or they try to cancel people, which is going even further. And this is what this guy is trying to do. Well, I don't have a body, so everyone's got to release their bodies. Everyone's got to become digitized. So he makes himself feel better. Okay, so now we got Jupiter Jazz parts 1 and 2. I feel like these are relatively comparable in terms of the quality, and it's one continuous story anyway, so I figured I'd put them on the same tier. And I really love this little 2-part episode because you get to see a little bit of insight into Vicious's past, and Gren's a very interesting and complex character as well. I think the best part of this 2-episode story is when they go into the past of Gren and Vicious on that desolate planet that sort of looks like a desert. And the music was really good, but I really liked just the atmosphere that it created. And it kind of makes you think like war is going on all around the world right now. And if we start colonizing other planets, will there just be planets exclusively for war? Just absolute hellholes that are just bombed and bombarded constantly and until they're torn to shreds? Like, that really made me think a lot about that. And you'll just have the affluent planets that no one touches, and you just have the upper middle class and the elites living there, and then you'll have the poor and impoverished on Earth or other planets, and they'll just sort of be left behind, and they won't have any sort of communication or knowledge of what's going on in the rest of the universe. It was very interesting in that regard. And anytime you get to learn more about Spike and Vicious's past is really cool. If there was ever a spin-off series, I would love to learn more about Vicious and Gren, and just kind of explore that whole war dynamic as well. I feel like that could could be a nice little series in and of itself, or even like a short little like OVA. That would be really cool. Or like a movie. That would be nice as well. And then we got Real Folk Blues Part 2, another fantastic episode. I love the music when Spike's running through the tower that Vicious is in, the Red Dragon Syndicate Tower. And just a fantastic episode, the culmination of so many different things, and just really well done. A nice cap off to the series. I love that the ending is ambiguous, where it sort of makes it feel like it's a dream. It kind of has that like blurred white kind of filter, and just nice music, and you know, the ending scene where he's like bang, you know, just like the perfect ending right there, you know. Just, I know a lot of people are sad to see Spike go, but if it would have just been your prototypical ending where like Spike returns to the ship and like, hey guys, let's go back to bounty hunting, and then Edward comes back in the fold and it's all nice and roses and happy ending, like it wouldn't have been as memorable or as impactful. Like, I remember that ending with the bang and him falling on the stair steps. That is the kind of ending you want to see. It almost reminds you of like maybe going up the stair steps to heaven, or possibly even down to hell. Like, you know, it's just it very symbolic in so many ways. Okay, and then we got Ballad of Fallen Angels, and not much of a surprise here. Episode 5 is either number 1 or 2 or 3 for most people. You know, we get the introduction of Vicious, and probably the reason that this episode is so high is because at the very end you get that nice little montage moment at the church where Spike is falling out of the window, and you see the roses, and you see Spike walking away in the rain, and you see Julia and Vicious, and just no explanations. You just get the images and the music, and you're left to guess, like, what the heck happened in this man's past? Why does Vicious hate him so much? Why does he hate Vicious so much? And you get that iconic scene at the church as well, where Vicious is standing over Spike with the sword, and Spike's got his gun up at him. And I love that in the Netflix adaptation that they kept this scene. You see it in the opening sequence. Like, if they would have got rid of that, it wouldn't be Cowboy Bebop. Like, you need that scene. It's one of the hallmark scenes of the series. So, fantastic episode through and through. But it's not number 1 in my book. Number 1 is none other Pierre Le Fou, and this is so great in so many ways. There's a montage moment of Mad LeFou, the man before he became the man, of all the experiments that they were doing on him, and the torture, and it was just so well done. Like, I can't even put it into words, really. I'll probably have a little video montage when I complete this video so you guys can see it for yourselves. And it reminds me so much of Batman. There's a character in Batman called the Mad Hatter, and he even has a little bit of a Joker-esque kind of smile and characteristics as well. You know, it ends with them at the carnival, and it feels like a 90s Batman episode, like a rated R 90s Batman episode. It's just so nostalgic, and the atmosphere is so dark and murky, and the gun scenes are probably the best in the series. Just so many great moments that are just so emblematic of what Cowboy Bebop is about. It's cool, it's horrifying. In a lot of ways, it feels like a horror episode. Like, if they made this like a rated R horror movie, it would just be absolutely terrifying. And the callbacks to some of the Batman-esque elements as well. It's just so cool in so many different ways. So with that, guys, tell me what you guys think is the best episode of Cowboy Bebop. Let me know your top 5 or top 10, or if you want to list 1 through 26, go for it. But let's hope that the November 19th Cowboy Bebop adaptation lives up to the hype. I have high expectations, which is probably a trap. It's probably going to disappoint me. You know, when you set the expectations too high, it never quite lives up to them. But let's hope. It looks like it's going to be good. At least the animation is. So yeah, tell me what you guys think, and I'll catch you on the flip side.